Hi everyone. Now that we've entered the next chapter into the Dark Ether storyline, that being Modern Warfare Zombies, I wanted to take the time to talk about something that I don't really see people talk about all too often, especially not for Call of Duty, that being how to lore. This video marks the beginning of a mini-series on the channel where we'll be discussing just how to interpret all the different little story beats that make up that larger overarching story. We'll be talking specifically about zombies, but most of this can be applied to the rest of the game and really any other piece of fiction out there, whether it be other games, books, movies, or even TV shows. I get questions somewhat frequently both in replies and direct messages asking me just how exactly I know and remember all of this stuff, and the truth is really that I don't. The story itself is ever changing and evolving. New information comes in, though seldomly some stuff gets retconned. New revelations about older information through recontextualization. It can all get very confusing at times, but with this series we're going to try and give you the tools to be able to fit everything together and see the narrative as a whole. The gameplay you'll be seeing throughout this series is of older Zombies iterations. I must admit, I'm kind of a sucker for that old school style of classic Call of Duty commentaries from the earlier days of YouTube, so if I capture those kinds of vibes, I will be accomplishing one of my goals with this series. But other than that, I hope you enjoy the videos. And to kick things off, in my opinion, one of the most important things for you to do to be able to really start delving into any narrative is to suspend disbelief. It seems rather obvious, but realize that at the end of the day, it's a piece of fiction created by a team of writers. Things aren't going to line up perfectly with real life logic, and things just won't make sense sometimes. These writers are human too, they aren't infallible, but understand that in me saying that, I'm not talking about huge plot-destroying errors or mistakes that would invalidate the entire story as a whole. I'm talking about small stuff. For example, on January 4th, 1940, whenever Richtofen is teleported to the moon for the first time, by complete accident, he's not wearing a spacesuit. He's standing in a circular chasm, just below the surface of our moon, and is standing in front of the MPD, which he's just now discovered. And yet, he's able to breathe in a complete vacuum. Now, the easy solution here, and what you're probably thinking, is simply that the MPD itself is producing oxygen for him to breathe. The problem with that is what he does next. He pulls out a lighter for him to be able to see his surroundings. Now, would anyone like to guess what happens whenever you ignite a flame in an enclosed pocket of oxygen? If you said he exploded instantly, you'd be exactly right. Now, do you see what I've done here? I've taken this one little mistake and I've nitpicked it to death. And I've tried every way to try and fit it into a frame of logic that just isn't going to work. Don't do that. Yes, give constructive criticism and point out these mistakes, but don't make yourself sit and dwell on it too hard. Don't try endlessly to apply real-world logic to the smallest little nooks and crannies of the fiction itself, because it'll likely lessen your ability to be able to truly enjoy the story. Why am I saying this? Because I used to be that exact kind of person. I used to go around and ask endlessly, trying to get an exact answer for how one particular aspect works, and then not be satisfied with the reality of it's just one of those weird things. These situations aren't around every corner of the CoD Zombies storyline, but they do come up every now and then. And in all reality, the example I used here, I chose specifically because it's really the biggest one I can pull off the top of my head for this. It doesn't really happen all too often. And in the case of the example I used, the best answer is something along the lines of just, the MPD somehow allowed him to breathe. Short and simple. No need to get bogged down, let's keep moving ahead. The second thing you need to do, in my opinion, and it seems really obvious again, but you need to actually play the maps. Now, a lot of us have jobs and responsibilities, and we really don't have time to sit around and play a video game hardly. But here's the thing. I'm not saying you need to hop on Keynote or Turton and play to round 150. I'm not saying you need to sit down and play every single Easter egg back to back, though having played some of them, will drastically help you along your journey. All I'm saying is to take about 30 minutes to an hour, load into any map of your choosing, and just look around. Get a real good feel for the atmosphere and tone of the map. This will allow you to get a better idea of what the devs were going for on a thematic level. And while you're doing this, listen and pay attention to the dialogue. Try and get a feel for how the characters interact with one another, and how they're connected to the place where the map is set. While you're doing this, try and also start piecing together the motivations for each character on a personal level. This is somewhat difficult for maps in the earlier days of the story, just because of how much the story wasn't really even there to an extent until around Doris. But there were still moments where the important character bits would shine through, like for example, Takio's severe devotion to the Emperor of Japan, or Richtofen's desire for power. Another real big thing to look out for on the maps are audio recordings, radios. Since the inception of CoD Zombies have been the main and central method for getting across important story beats pertaining to important characters, groups, organizations within the story, places, and in general other happenings within the deeper lore. While radios are definitely the bigger thing to keep an eye out for, you also have little notes, logos, sentences written on the walls in chalk, and ciphers that will give you small tidbits of lore and even hints to future content such as maps. If you're someone who is somewhat new and is trying to figure out and gain a better understanding of the old EFRA storyline, which ran from World at War all the way to Black Ops 4, I would especially recommend that you do what I've said here in this portion of the video on the map Doris. Doris as a map is in a lot of ways where the story truly kicks off. Shino Numa introduced us to our central four characters, but Doris is where they laid the groundwork for so many integral story beats and concepts. Things like the Ether, Agartha, the moon base, and even the more extraterrestrial elements that you wouldn't even see fully realized until much later into the overarching story. This is a map that if you are new to zombies, I would strongly recommend trying to soak in the most.